So, what if I told you that the greatest healing force isn't something you have to go searching for? It's already within you. Most people think self energy means being some kind of Zen master, never reacting, always calm, always okay with everything. But that's not actually true. Self energy isn't about being passive. It's actually about being more deeply aware, present, and connected, even in the messy. And today I'm going to show you exactly what that means. So, we're diving into today the 8 C's of self energy, plus a ninth one nobody talks about, the 5 P's of self, and how they're different from the C's, the biggest misunderstandings people have about self energy, how it's actually on a continuum, and how we can shift, and how you can use self leadership to call on the gifts of your parts instead of letting them run the show. So, by the end of this video, you'll understand how to access self energy, how to embody it, and why it changes everything. So, let's get into it. I'm Andrea Tessier, IFS practitioner, master life coach, and I help conscious leaders use parts work and inner child healing to lead and live with more authenticity and ease. So if you're ready to expand your inner world, hit that subscribe button. So let's start here. What is self-energy? Because self-energy is not about always being calm. It's about being deeply, deeply aware. It's about having a relationship with your parts, and it's about leading yourself, not getting rid of parts, but guiding them. Just like the sun is always there behind the clouds, so is self-energy. No matter what is going on inside of you or what is happening in life outside of you, self-energy is present. It's not something you can create. It's not something you go get. It's something you uncover. So IFS assumes, first of all, that everyone has a self. Everyone has a calm, embodied, internal witness. IFS assumes that while parts can be wounded and be burdened, self can never be damaged. And when we're not in full acceptance, we're in a part. IFS also assumes multiplicity, that we are made up of many internal parts. And all of those parts work together in relationship, in a dynamic. And by changing one part, unburdening one part, and blending from one part, it shifts the dynamic of the whole system. So before we go any further, we need to clear up some misconceptions about self-energy. First of all, self-energy does not mean being a Buddha. It does not mean always being calm and never reactive. No. Self-energy isn't about suppressing emotions or staying zen all of the time. It is about awareness. It's about noticing emotions and making choices from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. Another misconception that I get all of the time is that if I'm in self-energy, nothing bad will ever happen to me. Again, no. Life keeps lifing. Challenges happen, disappointments happen, uncertainty happens. But when you are in self, you are more equipped to handle whatever life brings to you. And instead of spiraling into old patterns, you can actually meet those challenges with greater resilience and wisdom. Another misconception that my clients have sometimes when they first come to me is that I should be in self-energy all of the time. No one is in self-energy 100% of the time. That is not realistic. The goal isn't to be in self all of the time. It's to recognize when you're blended with a part and know how to return to self. The fourth misconception that people really buy into is that self-energy means I don't need my parts anymore. No. Self doesn't mean getting rid of parts. It leads them. Your parts have gifts. Your parts have wisdom. And when you can engage with them from self-leadership, they actually support you rather than take over. Now, one of the best ways to recognize whether you have self energy or access to it are through the 8 C's. And so we're going to break them down. And I guarantee as you're listening to these, you'll recognize, oh, I already do that, or I already have that, or I do that sometimes. And yeah, that's the whole point, because the reason that self energy is called self is because most people, when they're really tapped into it, they say, oh, that's myself. That's who I am. And so the 8 C's are qualities of self energy. You'll notice that these are what are present when you have access to self energy. First of all, self energy is calm. It's not reactive. It's also not disengaged or disassociated, right? Imagine you're in a tense meeting or a conflict with someone you care about. And instead of reacting emotionally, you take a breath, you ground yourself, and you're able to respond. The second C, clarity. You're able to see things as they are, not through the filter of a part or through the agenda of a part. So instead of assuming a client's frustration is personal, you recognize they're struggling with their own challenges and it's not about you. The third C is compassion, right? Genuine care for yourself and others, right? You might notice, as an example, a perfectionist part that gets activated. And instead of being frustrated, instead of criticizing yourself, instead of going like, oh, not this again, you're able to meet it with kindness. The fourth C of self is confidence. That steady, quiet knowing, a level of certainty. Maybe not certainty that the outcome will go exactly as planned, but a certainty that you are enough. Like you decide to launch a program without completely second guessing yourself and spinning your wheels. You trust that your skills, your experience, your wisdom are enough. That's confidence. The fifth C is courage, a willingness to face discomfort. Right? Imagine you have a difficult conversation with a partner, with a friend, with a client, and you're able to meet it without feeling shut down or avoiding it completely. That's courage. Creativity is when you are open to possibilities. It's when you have access to creative problem solving. You can let go of rigid business strategies and instead create offers in a way that feel really aligned and inspired for you. The seventh C is connectedness, feeling part of something so much greater. You are a web in the tapestry of life. You sense a deep connection to your purpose, your work, and the people that you serve, the people around you. And the 8th C is curiosity, the ability to wonder without judgment. So as an example, perhaps a difficult emotion arises, and instead of being frustrated with it or willing it away, curiosity might ask, what is this trying to show? And then I would like to propose a 9th C, a 9th C that is choice. Choice is where true freedom lies. This is what allows us to feel empowered rather than at the whim of our automatic responses. Without choice, we're simply acting from conditioned parts, but with choice, we become self-led. We decide how we want to respond rather than reacting unconsciously. Let's take perfectionism as an example. Many people think they need to eliminate their perfectionist parts. But what if instead you had choice about how and when and where to engage with it, right? Imagine you're working on a passion project. And instead of your perfectionist part shutting you down with the it's not good enough, it's not perfect, you could choose to let it help you refine the final details, but only when the time is right. The perfectionist doesn't run the show, but its skill can be useful when led by self. That's the power of choice. That's the way we get to work with our parts, not against them. Now let's talk about the 5 P's of self-energy. While the 8 C's, the 9 C's describe the qualities of self-energy, the 5 P's describe how self-energy is embodied in action. These are the ways we bring self-leadership into our lives, our relationships, our work, our relationship to ourselves. The first is presence, the ability to be fully in the moment, attuned to yourself and attuned to others. As an example, you're in a coaching session, you're in a therapy session, you're working with a client, and instead of thinking about what you'll say next, you're deeply attuned, you're listening, you know what your client is expressing, you see them. The second C is patience. You're able to trust the timing of things rather than forcing or rushing. You feel, as an example, perhaps you have an urge to fix something in yourself or in a client, but instead you allow the process to unfold organically, trusting that real transformation happens over time. The third C is perspective. You're able to see beyond immediate circumstances to understand the bigger picture. So instead of taking a business setback personally as an example, you step back. You actually recognize it as an opportunity to learn, to pivot, to realign to what's truly important. Fourth is persistence, staying committed to the work, the project, the inner work, leading from self even when it's hard. As an example, perhaps a familiar fear or doubt resurfaces, but instead of avoiding it, instead of being frustrated with it, you engage with your parts. You continue to build trust and deepen your self-leadership. And the fifth, my favorite, is playfulness. It's the quality of bringing curiosity and lightness to the process rather than rigidity. As an example, you experiment with your marketing. You play with allowing yourself to try new things without attaching to a perfect outcome. You make the process more enjoyable and sustainable. So like I said, the 8 C's describe who we are when we're in self, and the P's describe how we move through the world when we're embodied in self-energy. And when both are present, we step into this more liberated, aligned way of leading and living. So now you can actually use self-energy to call on the gifts of your parts. Because self-energy and self-leadership isn't about suppressing our parts. It's actually about unblending from them, unburdening them, so you can call on them as needed. When we lead from self, we don't exile or reject the parts of us that have helped us to survive. We reconcile them. We integrate them in a way that allows us to use their strengths intentionally rather than letting them take over automatically. So let's talk about some examples of how this works in practice. So as an example, many people have a perfectionist part. And here's how we can start to use perfectionism as a gift. So instead of letting perfectionism paralyze you, keeping you from sharing your work with the world or taking action, self-energy allows you to call on this part when refinement is needed. It's like useful when you're reviewing important details before publishing something or ensuring a standard of quality work or But instead of letting it dictate every decision, you use it strategically. Then you ask it to step back when it's time to move on. If you have a planner card, many people have a vigilant planner. A planning part can be an incredible asset when you need to organize a project, when you need to create a roadmap for a goal or prepare for an event. But if it's running the show all the time, it may lead to overthinking and overwhelm and procrastination. But with self-leadership, this means that you can use the strengths of this part for structure, for clarity, while not allowing it to spiral into fear-based control. I think some of us have a performer, and the performer harnessed with self-energy shows up as confidence. Some people have these performer parts that help them show up in big moments, on stage, in a meeting, when delivering a presentation. But rather than rejecting this part as inauthentic, you can recognize that it gives you presence, charisma, and energy as needed. And self-leadership means that we get to invite this part in consciously, rather than letting it take over as a mask to hide vulnerability. So when we engage our parts with awareness and intention, we shift from being controlled by them to leading with them. They become an asset. This is the power of self-leadership, using our inner resources in a way that serves us, rather than unconsciously reacting from conditioned pattern. As this is where it gets really juicy. Self-energy isn't all or nothing. I truthfully find that it makes more sense if we think about it existing on a continuum of access. And so you can visualize this continuum from dissociation on one end to transcendence on the other. So dissociated means that we're completely unaware of time or place. We've checked out. There is not a lot of room for self-energy here. When we're flooded, we are overwhelmed by emotion. When we are blended, we have some self-awareness, but it's obvious parts are still leading. Parts are driving the bus. When we are self-led, we have self-awareness down to the level of the exile. We can hold presence even when there's dysregulation or others are dysregulated. When there's self-energy, or when you're in self-energy, it's like there's pure presence. There is attunement. It's almost like there is no need for words. And then there's complete transcendence. No separation between self and the world. This is like a deep spiritual connection. So your work isn't to get rid of parts. That's not the point. It's to develop a relationship, support yourself with a critical mass of self-energy so that you can move along the continuum towards more self-leadership and self-energy states. And when we do, our lives, our relationships, our creations in the world feel like they're truly ours. So today we covered the 8 C's of self, plus the 9th one nobody talks about, the 5 P's of self-leadership and how they're different from the C's, the biggest misunderstandings people have about self-energy, how it's actually on a continuum and we can shift into it, and how you can use self-leadership to call in the gifts of your parts instead of letting them run the show. So remember, this work is not linear, but every moment of curiosity leads you to greater and greater freedom. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more IFS insights every week. What resonated with you today? Share in the comments. I love hearing from you. And thanks for being here. See you in the next one.